And so Jesus begins to tell this story that I want us to read because I want to make sure that every single one of us, particularly if some of you are hearing this story for the first time, I want you to see who our God is. The story begins in verse 11. Scripture says, Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. And the younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.'" In other words, he was saying, I've got an inheritance coming, and I'm not ready to wait for you to die. I don't know how long. You could be kicking this can down the road really long, and I may miss some opportunities to have a really good time with all that cash you're sitting on, Pops. And essentially what he was telling his dad was that what you have is more important than who you are. And if we take it a step further, we could even say that the son was essentially saying to his dad, "You're as good to me as dead. Just give me my inheritance now." You know, I've got little kids, and my 2 oldest are kind of coming of age. And, you know, little kids, when they're young, it's just programmed inside of us. Like, they know how to get what they want. I mean, down to like 3 and 4 years old. They change their tone. They bat their eyes at you. They want ice cream, or they want candy, or they want chips, or they want to stay up late, or they want to spend the night at a friend's house. Man, they know how to pull the strings. Everything changes. Dad, hey, Dad. Dad. I like calling my kids out when they do that. I'm like, "What do you want?" "Don't be buttering me up because you want something." And that's cute when you're young, but when you get older, like when you're in your 20s or your 30s, and you essentially come and you say, "Hey, listen, everything that you have for me, I'd rather have that than have a relationship with you." That stings. That hurts because you know what you're doing. And we're not talking about cotton candy and dip cones anymore. Right? We're talking about heart stuff. We're talking about the fact, son, that I've actually foregone those opportunities in my life so that I could save these things up for you. I said no to pleasure so that I could give you a fresh start. Right? And so the son takes all this cash and he runs out, and the scripture tells us, verse 13, not long after, the younger son got together all that he had and he took a little trip. And he wasn't investing in business properties. He wasn't going out trying to buy, more land and make a name for himself. Scripture tells us that he takes everything that his dad worked for. Not even what he worked for. Maybe one thing, if you work for that, you do what you want with stuff that you've worked for. But he goes to his dad and he says, "I want what's yours, that belongs to me." Listen to this entitledness. Right? This belongs to me. He takes it, and then he just goes and he just spends it. I mean, we're just talking like craziness, revelry, blows it. We don't know exactly what he was doing, but the scripture just tells us that he squanders it. He has nothing to show for it. And then as the story goes, look with me if you would at verse 14. After he had spent everything, then there was a severe famine, economic meltdown. Recession. Didn't think about that, did you, son, when you're spending all my money? After he spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went out and he hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. Now, if you know anything about the Jewish culture, you'll know that pigs are considered to be unclean animals. That religiously, ceremoniously, morally, you weren't allowed to interact with, touch, or eat pigs. And here, in the greatest moment of shame and desperation and despair, not only has he turned his back on his dad, but now he's out there and he's feeding pigs. And it gets so bad that the scripture tells us that the slop that the pigs are eating is actually better than the food that he's eating. Like, I want you to imagine the state of desperation that you must be in, to be looking at what pigs are eating and saying, "I think I'll take some of that." In the middle of all of this, he's hit the low of the low. And if you're anything like me, you're praying that like our kids would never, ever have to experience that. The kid has a revelation and he realizes, man, there's guys that are working at my dad's house. Like, there are servants that my dad has paid that are doing better than I am. And so here's what he does. He tells himself this story. He says, I'm going to go back to my dad, and I'm going to work this through, and I'm going to tell my dad, listen, I understand. I blew it. I get it. You don't even have to treat me like a son anymore, man. Just hire me out, all right? And we ain't got to go through all this. I don't have to have my room back. I don't have to have my seat at the family table. I'm hungry, man. And I just want to be in a safe place. So can I come back home and I'll do whatever you tell me. And he's worked this up. It's a great plan. It makes total sense. The scripture tells us in verse 20, it says, so he got up and he went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him. And here's our word, friends. When he saw him, his father wasn't vindictive. When he saw him, he didn't fold his arms and go, yep, I knew it. I knew you'd come back. He didn't say, now, are you ready to listen to some common sense now? Life's hard out there, isn't it? What'd you do with all my money? It's not what the scripture says. The first thing the scripture tells us is that the father saw him when he was a long way off, guys. Which tells me, and we don't know how long this little road trip of revelry took this boy, but it tells me that our God's the God who sits on the porch and looks down the horizon and recognizes us when we return. Friends, he's the God who waits. He's the God who watches. And he's the God who deals compassionately with us. Like, what I need you to hear about who God is in the same way that mom whose baby was about to die spoke up because she was so moved deep inside of her bones. This is that God. This is the God that we serve. And this is what that God did. He gets up out of his rocking chair and he undignifies himself. Do you know how he does that? We know he undignifies himself because the scripture says he ran. And in that culture, as undignified, in order to run, he had to lift up his robe, exposing the skin of his legs, but he didn't care. You know, it was undignified, too, for Jesus to hang naked on a cross. That was undignified. And what I'm here to tell you today is that we serve a God who's willing to embarrass himself. And he's willing to be undignified. And he's willing to go to whatever lengths he has to go to, that the moment he sees us turn, friends, you know in Hitch when he was like, no, I told you, you go 90, I go 10. Friends, listen, we have the God who goes 100. That the moment he sniffs out the fact that we're turning in his direction, I'm telling you, he's a God who gets off the porch and he runs. And look at what he does. Out of his compassion, out of this intense emotion of care and concern that moves him to action, the father throws his arms around the son. And the son, I love it. He's ready, man. He's ready. Dad. Dad, listen, I know I don't deserve this. You don't have to take me back. I blew it. I don't have any money left. I mean, like, the scriptures tell us that he came like straight from the pig pen. Now, you got to get this picture. He's soiled. He's dirty. He's despicable. He's disgusting. He's got pig junk all over him. So when the father hugs him and pulls him in close, he's getting everything that was on the son on him, and he doesn't care. Because this is what he's telling the son. We're face to face again, son. We're together. We have a chance. We can be reconciled. You can hear my heart. We can make this right. I can smell the scent of your being coming off of you. I can run my fingers through your hair. again. Son, it doesn't matter. I don't want to hear your speech. I'm just glad that you're not dead and you're home. We'll work it out, but right now you need to know we're going to throw a party. Because this is what I think about you. We serve the God who is moved with compassion, friends. You don't have to beat yourself up to win your way back into his favor. That's not our God. That might be somebody else's God, but we're talking about the God who raises Jesus from the dead. We're talking about the God of Exodus 3 who calls Moses aside and says, son, I hear of the cries of my children. We're talking about the God who calls Moses up and he says, I know that you broke the first round of tablets, but son, I am the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God who is slow to anger and abounding in love and maintaining loyal love and faithfulness to thousands. Guys, that's our God. That's our God. The God who watches on the porch. The God who lifts up his robe, the God who runs to us, the God who throws his arm around us, the God who gets pig slop on himself, the God who weeps over us, the God who runs his finger through our hair and looks us dead in the eyes and says, I love you and my heart is compassionate towards you. That's your God. That's your God. That's your God. That's your God, friends. So any moment that you're wasting in the pig pen is a moment that you're stealing from him. And it's a moment that you could be feasting at his table. Friends, will you stand to your feet with me this morning? I feel this in my bones today that there are some of us who have a hard time being compassionate with ourselves. And you know why that is? There's so many reasons. But the world wants to convince you that the only way for you to make it in this world is to be harder on yourself. Life doesn't hand out any free treats. Money doesn't grow on trees. Pull up your bootstraps. Stop your whining. Suck it up. This is not the language of the God who runs. So when the Bible tells us don't be conformed to the image of the world, like you have to, whatever that running narrative is in your head, and maybe it was from your own father, or maybe it was from your own mom, or maybe it was from the military, or maybe it was from a pastor or a deacon board or an elder board, or maybe it's from a youth pastor, or maybe it's from a previous spouse. I don't know who this is coming from, but I'm here to tell you today, if it's not the language of the Father who runs and weeps over you with loving compassion, friends, you got to push that language far away from you. Because it's keeping you from touching the compassionate heart of God. And here's what I know, that you and I will never be compassionate to the people of the world around us. We'll never be compassionate to our daughters. We'll never show compassion to our wife when she runs in, when she has a car accident. We'll never be compassionate to our husband when he loses his job. We'll never be compassionate to someone who's living a different life. So we will never be vessels of compassion until we let the compassion of God wrap us like a royal robe.